Hello and welcome back once again to CBR MTG. My name is Angus Mackay. I'm joined here by Frank Karamarudis.
Hi guys, and I'm just looking at the footage right now. We are framing in and out to start.
Yeah, that's right. This is the first video taken from GP Sydney 2018, and you can tell because unfortunately there's a little bit of shakings. This was a fun day. We took a little while to set up, as all good things take a little while to set up, but I pushed the camera just a little bit too close to the table, and we will get a little bit of shaking, so I apologize in advance, but I thought it would be worth it for what is a very interesting game between Joe Dean on Jund and Matthew Wood on 5-color Death Shadow. If you don't know by now, we are playing Modern.
Important to note.
Since the return of Bloodbraid Elf, Jund's kind of on the uptick now, right, Frank?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because immediately after the unbanning, Jund was kind of the premier deck. It was the deck that people were going to and was just putting up the most success.
Sure.
However, as kind of the recent GP showed, Bloodbraid Elf is in kind of a weird place in the meta, in that the decks that have been seeing lots of success, like Humans and Tron and Burn and aggressive decks, are good against Bloodbraid Elf. So you have this weird transitionary match where Jund is still kind of doing really well, and like decks like 5-color Death Shadow haven't really adjusted super well to the inherent value that you get from Bloodbraid Elf. So this is a really interesting match between a new deck that like has kind of already had the meta warp around it, and you've seen that in results, and what ended up being kind of the best Death Shadow deck for quite a while. Yeah,
it's interesting, right? It's like the new kid on the block, as in the new sort of best deck being Death Shadow, and the elder of the format in Jund sort of battling out to see who reigns supreme. Unfortunately, we got a little bit of glare on the far right side of Matthew Wood's table, but we just saw a Thoughtseize. We've seen 2 redraws coming out of Street Wraith, and we have a couple of fetches as well, so he's doing his very hardest to put that Death Shadow down as soon as possible.
It's interesting as well because on some level they're very similar decks, but they play out so incredibly differently in that you have a disruption package, you have value creatures and incredibly powerful creatures, and then you have removal, and that's what the deck breaks down into.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Jund is kind of, it's the Jund deck of the format. It does all of these things, and it used to do them the best, but then you see the Death Shadow, which just kind of has more efficient creatures in terms of Death Shadow, and you have Tarmogoyf in this version, just kind of being a little bit bigger and a little bit cheaper than what you see in Jund. And so the interesting thing is that Bloodbraid Elf has kind of shifted that back, so that now Jund is has a favorable matchup against the like Death Shadow decks, because you have that more value from the Bloodbraid Elf, and that's I think that's really interesting how much just a matchup and a whole format can change through the reintroduction of 2 cards. And we haven't even seen a lot of Jace.
I think Jace just kind of fizzled, I think. Jace, unfortunately, in Legacy, Jace is one of the best cards in the format, like defining, it warps around Brainstorm and Brainstorm effects, and Jace being one of them is such a huge and powerful card. But in Modern, it's like you cast a 4-mana enchantment that dies on the crackback. It's just like you can't play it on turn 4.
I think a really important thing to note is that people were trying to insert Jaces into decks that previously existed, and I think Jace is a counterintuitive card to play in a format where we make a lot of assumptions.
Sure.
Jace is actually best behind creatures, and you see that through like when Callblade was really powerful.
Yeah.
Because you had creatures to block and protect Jace.
Yeah.
you then got all of the huge amounts of value that he can do so quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you can see decks like Bant Company or Bant Spirits. They've been having a little bit of success with Jace in their deck.
Yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
really
absolutely.
interesting to note, in that that's not where, people are putting him. They're putting him in control decks. And
Which is interesting as well, because I've seen a couple in Amulet Titan. I've seen a couple in the there's like a 5-color Scapeshift deck as well that plays 1 or 2 copies. It's just like a nice way to sort of power it out. But if you're playing it on turn 3, it's kind of different.
and in Storm.
You know? Yeah,
He's good
I
in
haven't seen that, but
combo
that's
as
very
well,
interesting.
because you need that card selection.
Yeah, for sure.
What we're seeing here is Matthew just having a giant Death Shadow, a 10/10.
He's worked very hard to get the Death Shadow to where it needs to be, and now it's. I mean, it can attack. It might die on the crackback to this to this treetop village and on Joe's side, but yeah, look, here we are.
These matchups are always really interesting because they always end up being incredibly, incredibly greedy and grindy. In that you see that each person has 1 card in their hand.
Yeah.
And they're not really doing a lot. It ends up being a stalemate most of the time. And then there's 1 card, and in this case, it's Scavenging Ooze, that ends up changing the value of, like, the equity of this match. And so, yeah, I love these matchups because they are very, very skill intensive.
Matt's left in a spot now where Joe's put him in a position where he's basically like, do you have the answer or I win?
Yeah,
and that's
exactly it.
That's one of my favorite points of Magic. It's just like having that. If you have the answer, then you win. If I have the answer, I win, and that's like a really pinnacle moment in every match that you play.
And setting yourself up for a situation where you have removed all of the right things and you have discarded all of the right things.
You've made the right choices throughout the game, and now you're getting
the payoff.
rewarded for it. Yeah, absolutely.
And that's what it looked like Joe efficiently did. And so you see the players look like they're actually bringing in some of the more traditional value cards. So I saw Huntmaster of the Fells for Joe.
Yeah.
As well as a...
Huntmaster's a pretty good card in this matchup. I mean, it's the 5-color Death Shadow isn't really a control deck. It's more of a mid-range deck. Grixis Death Shadow is 100% a control deck that just has Death Shadow as finishes. Like it plays Hand Disruption and counter spells in the form of Stubborn Denial, but it's very much a control deck. But this one kind of looks like just all value.
Well, that's really interesting, is that Matthew is looking to take out Kolgan's command.
Okay.
And Temur Battle Rage, which is very understandable because in a matchup where, like, you're really removal intensive.
Yep.
Getting rid of the combo piece is fine. Kolgan's command on the other side is a really interesting choice, just because you are bringing out something that grinds value, right? He is bringing in Lingering Souls, which is another good choice.
In a Godless Shrine as well. That's very interesting. So this is a 5-color by choice because he has a 1 of Godless Shrine in his sideboard, and Lingering Souls is going to do really well for him, I think.
Yeah, it's incredibly good, and it shines in these kind of matches. And that's one of the power of Death Shadow, is that because you are playing all of the Shocklands, just like they were normal dual lands, because you're okay with taking that damage, you're going to be able to have almost perfect mana almost all the time. And that's why you see such greedy decks.
Yep.
I love these matchups. I love these 5-color Death Shadow. Like, that's what I like to play.
Highly interactive decks as well, Then neither of them, like, the Temur Battle Rage is in there in case you have to go the combo route. If you want to get through Affinity or you want to punch through some damage against Burn, they put in 1 blocker and then you accidentally kill them for 20.
That's actually why you've seen the Humans deck come to prominence, is because they can go wide incredibly efficiently, and Death Shadow does poorly against go wide decks.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's why Lingering Souls is so good, especially against Death Shadow, but also when you're able to play it, like, it's a mirror breaker.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's also very good in Jund because you have 2 cards for 1. So you've got just so much more value. Yeah.
Absolute value. And I don't think either of them are sort of priced into playing any graveyard hate unless one of them brought in surgical extraction, but it's just like something that you just wouldn't bring in this matchup. So you're pretty free to play those flashback spells as much as you want.
Yeah, so there are reasons to bring it in. So Tarmogoyf is a good choice, and
of course it's a good choice, but they're both getting hit by...
Oh, if it's Nihil Spellbomb.
Oh, okay,
which is a lot of... actually, both sides actually tend to play something like that.
Because it turns on Delirium pretty easily as well.
Well, yeah, so that's another point to look at for Matthew Wood. Traverse the Uvenwald is a incredibly powerful deck.
Yep,
for
a reason to play green. Yeah,
it's the reason to play green, but it's an incredibly powerful card for this matchup, just because if you can tutor for whatever creature is best in this scenario, like...
Yeah, absolutely.
You're very incentivized.
You can implement a toolbox strategy, whereas you're usually just a mid-range deck, you know?
Yeah. And so Graveyard Hate isn't a horrible choice here. It's better against like Grixis Death Shadow because you have like Tassiger.
Sure.
And you have Gurmag Angler, the zombie fish. Which means that those giant creatures that like John's removal as a fish is traditionally like less good against because they've been higher on Fatal Push and a little bit of Lightning Bolt. You know, it just deals with that almost perfectly.
Okay.
And
that's definitely reasonable. If it's one-sided, then you may as well. Yeah, cool. All right, well, that's fair enough. We're seeing our opening hands from our opponents, from our players. It looks like Matthew's just cycled through a Street Wraith and played a Bloodstained Mire, if I'm not mistaken, for an Overgrown Tomb.
He drew a Thoughtseize.
Okay, Thoughtseize for 10. That's probably okay.
Always have it.
Always have the turn 1 go down to 15 life plan.
I think he's going down to 13.
Because of the Street Wraith, of course.
So
this is pretty strong. This is a pretty decent hand from Joe. I mean, he's going to be leaning on this Dark Confidant a little bit, but he does have that Liliana and the redundant Liliana, and then eventually go into Bloodbraid Elf. I quite like this hand.
Yeah, so Liliana's incredibly good in this matchup just because Matthew's deck is
one creature.
Yeah, small amount of creatures, but they're all incredibly impactful.
Yeah.
And yeah, so say that Matthew, slams down Death Shadow next turn, like, Liliana is gonna deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he seems to have agreed with you because he's taken the Liliana, hoping to probably get the next Liliana. In a reasonable amount of time.
Did he draw an Inquisition?
He does have the Inquisition of Kozilek, so he will be able to get that second Liliana out of the hand, so that's pretty good for him. We'll see. We're just going straight forward, I think. Yep. Let's see what you drew. Did you draw anything else?
Another Bob.
Another Bob. Hey, Bob's pretty good. Oh, we're actually going for the Bob this time. Okay, perhaps we have a
it looks like
Abrupt Decay or Maelstrom Pulse or something to get rid of the Liliana.
Well, what it looks like is in his hand is a Lingering Souls. And Lingering Souls is very, very good against Liliana.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely. Discard it, get it back with flashback. Easy peasy. That's a combo.
Also, if you cast it, then Liliana's almost useless because if she minuses, then you can just kill it with the other soul. But also, you've only used up half a card, so you're generating that value.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a bad time for Liliana. Sure. Matthew seems to have a lot of the really good cards for this matchup. Yeah. So,
we'll see if he fetches the for that Godless Shrine. I can only assume that he would because he can't promise himself that he'll find the. He's gone for the Watery Grave. I'm just saying that he can't guarantee that he's going to find another fetch land, and he does need those fetch lands to get that Godless Shrine. But it appears that he values the blue mana a little bit more.
I think another thing is that, as you were saying, with Liliana, like if he discards it, then he just discards the Lingering Souls, and it's like he's not lost a card.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he can cast the second half of Lingering Souls off of that, and so it's less than ideal, but it's still. I think the blue might be more important because Stubborn Denial is pretty good in this matchup.
It's very interesting that he played that Tarmogoyf directly into the Liliana. I guess he's decided that he's going to get the value of the Lingering Souls, as you mentioned before, so he might be able to kill the Liliana with the Lingering Souls as soon as possible. looks like he's going to play it out. He did get another chance at a redraw for a fetch land, so he is going to get that Godless Shrine at this point. But he's down to 5 life. I mean, Joe doesn't have to work very hard, but I mean, we're putting two souls down to Joe's relatively empty board. If Joe can rip the land off the top, he might even be able to play that Bloodbraid Elf, and then it might even be game over for Matthew before he knows it.
Yeah. That's why these Death Shadow decks are so skill intensive, is that life resource management is something that isn't in a ton of decks, but also can be incredibly difficult to maintain.
Yeah.
Because if you are 1 life point off of, if your math is off by 1, you lose, essentially.
Exactly. Yeah.
Your Death Shadow is too small, or you don't end up having enough for lethal.
Yeah.
Or you lose it to the blocks. Like, it's incredibly important. But also, one of the reasons that this deck works is because you get the payoff almost every time with Traverse.
Yeah.
Because you can reliably cast Traverse, you can reliably get Death Shadow. And so it's like you have 8 copies. And that's really important to note because, the double Liliana. How many has he drawn?
He's definitely
drawn 3.
That was his 3rd Liliana that we've seen this game. I think he's just keeping Liliana out of Lingering Souls.
Yeah,
which is reasonable. I mean, you may as well. I think this must be a Traverse at this point, just by looking at it, searching his library. But what do we think? What do we like here? I guess we're just going for the Death Shadow.
Yeah, the Death Shadow is the thing that's going to be the biggest threat, and you do have the protection from the Lingering Souls.
Yeah.
The problem is that Death Shadow is pretty vulnerable to almost all of Joe's other removal besides like Lightning Bolt or Liliana right now.
Yeah.
Terminate, Fatal Push, like it can all be bad. And say that
Speak of the devil.
Yeah. So it's an interesting one because Joe can almost just slam. Oh.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
That looks like game over.
Yeah, that was
he got Junded out. And that's a kind of like a really important thing to note with this matchup is that Jund has kind of been revitalized when it was kind of falling off of the format just because of the Death Shadow decks did everything better.
Yeah.
The re-inclusion of Bloodbraid Elf has been so good for revitalizing it. And
absolutely. It's just the kind of pick-me-up that it needed.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he decided to board in the Maelstrom Pulse because it seems that it came from his sideboard, but I wouldn't imagine unless you soul read your opponent bringing in Lingering Souls and a Godless Shrine from the sideboard. I mean, I guess it's a clean removal for everything.
That's what I was gonna say. I think that it is a very clean removal for everything, and one of the things I guess Joe probably wasn't super duper sure what version of Death Shadow Matt was on, because if Matt was on a Grixis Death Shadow, like Tasigur is an incredibly hard Tasigur and Mega Angler are incredibly hard cards for
Can't
Joe.
push, can't bolt.
Yeah,
sure.
They're incredibly hard for Joe to deal with, and so I guess like he saw the Traverse, but also they saw some of those.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
So he brought in.
He took out the Fulminator Mages, so he's playing 3 main, which is a bit aggro, but more power to him, I suppose.
I think that's what he brought in. Because he brought in the Hunts Master.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so...
Trying to get him off colors? Yeah, okay, that's reasonable.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about, 5-color Death Shadow is that it's 5 colors.
Yeah,
It's the greatest it can be. Okay. It's interesting taking out Liliana. I think the card's very, very good. And he actually did what I really like doing with... taking out your discard in these kind of just really grindy matchups because they're the worst top decks.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to be straight gas 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much for both players for showing their decks on the camera on this very wonderful day. Congratulations for Joe Dean for taking that out with a 2-0 winning on Jund versus 5-color Death Shadow. Once again, my name is Angus Mackay. I'm joined here by Frank Karamarudis.
Thanks, guys.
Have a wonderful evening.